Okay, I really don't know what happened before. I had to go offline and come back because for some reason everyone keeps saying that they couldn't hear me or the video was paused for a very long time. So yes, here we go again. So hopefully you guys can now see me or hear me well. Okay, I'm trying to share the link again to the people that are asking on social media. Please, if you're here and you can see me or hear me, please say something on the chat. I really don't know what happened before. Hopefully you guys are not going to have that technicality again. So for anyone that's here now, please let me know if you can hear me or if you can see me. Because earlier when I came on live, people I kept getting messages that they're not able to hear me or see me. So can you just say something on the chat if you're able to hear me or if you're able to see me? Just say yes or no, okay? Because I want to make sure that the audio is good. You guys can hear me. Because I don't want to just talk and no one is able to hear me out there, please. So just say something on the chat. All right. Today we're going to talk about okay, nice. Thank you for confirming. Today we're going to talk about the differences between a backlog refinement and a sprint planning. So the backlog refinement and the sprint planning meeting, they have a lot and lot of similarity. Sometimes people get confused, especially if you're new to Scrum, right? You attend those meetings, you probably think it's the same meeting, the same thing that's happening. But no, those are two different meetings. So sprint planning actually is one of the Scrum ceremonies. Okay, it's one of the Scrum events. So it happens on the very first day of your sprint. So your spring planning kind of like kicks off your spring. It's a meeting that kicks off your spring. Once you have your planning, right after your planning is done, your team members now are going to go ahead and start doing the actual work itself. Okay, so your spring planning meeting kicks off your spring. That's the very first day of your spring that this meeting happens, and your team will start the work right away. However, your backlog refinement can happen multiple times in the middle of the spring. Okay, your backlog refinement should happen before the start of your sprint. Okay, it's a meeting that helps you guys to prepare for the upcoming spring. So if you guys, let's say you're going to start your spring in the next 2 weeks from now, you should at least have a one backlog refinement session before that spring planning meeting. This backlog refinement is going to help your team to prioritize the work, to make sure the story meets definition of ready. The purpose of the backlog refinement is to prioritize the backlog, to make sure the backlog looks good, the backlog looks healthy, you guys have enough stories there that are going to be worked on in the next spring that's coming up next. So if you guys are going to have your backlog refinement next, for example, coming up, you guys should have your refinement session couple of days or even a week before the spring planning meeting. It just kind of better prepare you guys for the upcoming spring. So really what happens during the backlog refinement meeting? During the backlog refinement meeting, the scrum master is going to be the one to facilitate. Also, the product owner obviously should be able to facilitate this meeting, right? But if the product owner cannot facilitate the meeting for whatever reason, the scrum master should be able to help facilitate this meeting. But the product owner should be in the meeting or some type of a subject matter expert, someone that understands the work that the team should focus on coming up next. Okay, so the product owner should facilitate the meeting or the scrum masters can facilitate the meeting. So during the backlog refinement meeting, your whole entire development team members are going to be there. You, the scrum master, is going to be part of the meeting and the product owner as well. Some teams do not have product owner. If you do not have a product owner, then if you have a BA, then your BA should also have the knowledge in understanding what is coming up next, and the BA should be able to guide the team during the backlog refinement meeting. So the goal of the refinement meeting again is to prioritize the backlog to make the story ready for the upcoming spring. So during the meeting, the whole team is going they're going to all come together. You guys are going to go in the backlog. You're going to review the stories that are in the backlog. The highest priority user stories that the team should focus on in the upcoming sprint. The product owner or the BA, whoever is really in charge of the backlog, is going to tell the team the highest priority user stories from the backlog. The team are going to review that story. They're going to ask questions to the product owner or whoever is facilitating the meeting. They're going to ask questions for whatever they didn't understand about the work that's coming up so they can get clarity and better understand the work that's coming up next. So once the team review the stories based on what the product owner is telling them that these are the highest priority stories, they're going to ask all the questions that they have in doubt, right? Once they understand the story really well to the best of their knowledge, that they feel like, you know what, we understand this work. We if this story do come up in a spring planning, if this is a story that we're going to work on in our upcoming spring, we do understand the story to the point where we're going to be able to execute and do the work and deliver the work. Okay. So if they really understand the story really well, they understand the descriptions, the acceptance criteria, then they can estimate the story. Okay. Again, estimation is the level of effort, how long it would take your team members to deliver that work. Okay. So the team needs to make sure, first of all, they understand the story descriptions very well. They understand the acceptance criteria on the story, how the story is going to get tested. They need to understand that very well. Once they understand it very well and they want to estimate the story during the refinement, if they have enough time, then they can go ahead and estimate that story. The purpose of the backlog refinement again is to make sure that the story meets definition of ready. Okay, so during the backlog refinement, let's say if stories were not yet created, you guys can write the user stories during the backlog refinement meeting. That's the purpose of the backlog. You guys can use the backlog refinement meeting to write stories from scratch, to modify existing stories. So let's say that you guys already have stories in your backlog that you guys are reviewing during that meeting. If the description is not clear, you guys can use that time to go over the story, modify the story to make sure that people understand the descriptions and the acceptance criteria. Okay, but if the story is already written, the team now can review the stories. If they review the stories, they understand the description really well, they understand the acceptance criteria really well. Now they can go ahead and estimate the story if they're ready to estimate the story. Once they estimate the story, it means that story the story pretty much can be moved over now to dev ready, right? The story can be moved over to the spring that's coming up next. You guys can move that story to that spring. You guys can mark that story dev ready, or you guys can mark that story groomed, right? Whatever, however you guys have your Jira or whatever tool you're using set up. If you guys have it dev ready, you guys can mark that story dev ready and move that story now over to the spring that is going to be worked on. If it's the upcoming spring, then you can move that story now into the upcoming spring if that's what the product owner wants. So that's the main purpose of the backlog refinement, to review the stories, to write stories from scratch if they have not yet been written, to modify existing stories to make it look good, right? And then for team members to estimate the stories if they feel like they understand the detail well, that they can estimate it. So we want the story to meet our definition of ready. So during the backlog refinement, if the team knows that, hey, this story is ready for development, they'll move that story now to dev ready, or they'll move that story now to the upcoming spring backlog, which is what you guys are going to be going over doing the spring planning. So now let's talk about the spring planning. The spring planning now is a meeting that happens once every single spring. It happens on the very first day of your sprint. The very first day of your spring, you guys are going to have a spring planning meeting, and your spring planning is a scrum event. This is a scrum event that happens every single spring and every single first day of the spring. This is the meeting that kicks off the spring. So during the spring planning meeting, the scrum master is going to be there, the product owner is going to be there, the developers are going to be there, obviously, and your QAs. However, I've also have stakeholders that joins the spring planning meeting. You talk to your product owner, right? If stakeholders need to be part of that meeting, obviously invite whoever needs to be part of that meeting, right? That can help answer any question. So during the planning meeting now, the team are going to now go over the stories that are ready to be worked on during that spring that's about to start. So all of the story that you guys had groomed previously, if those are still the main priority of the work that are going to be in that sprint, the product owner is going to guide the team to review the highest priority user stories that are already ready for the team to start working on. So, all of the stories that you guys did in the backlog refinement, if those stories are still priority that are going to be in that planning, in that spring planning meeting, the product owner is going to now, if you are the one facilitating the meeting, which obviously it should be you, the scrum master, facilitating the meeting, you're going to now um ask the product owner which of these user stories in the spring backlog are priority for the spring. You start with the highest priority, right? With the highest priority user story, open it up, have the team review the description of the story, have them review the acceptance criteria of the story, and ask them if they have any question, right? Review the story with the entire team. They can modify it again. Obviously, if there was anything that has changed from the backlog refinement, if anything has changed on the work, they can now modify the story to make it look good, right? Because we want our story to meet definition of ready. We want our user story to look good. So once the team start working on the story, once they accept those user story in the spring planning meeting, once they accept that they're going to focus and work on this story during the spring, we want them to not have too many problems, right? Working on the story. I mean, things might always come up, but we want to limit them. So that's why we're having all this meeting so team members can get all the questions answered. So during the spring planning meeting, you guys will go over all the highest priority user stories that are ready for development. The team will ask questions again if there's something that came up that they didn't ask during the backlog refinement, or if they just want to clarify something, they'll ask again during that planning meeting. The product owner should be able to answer. If the product owner cannot answer it, the product owner can reach out to a subject matter expert, maybe someone from the business that have a better understanding of the work to be able to answer their questions. So once you guys are done reviewing all the stories during the planning meeting, all the highest priority stories that the team wants to commit to in that spring, now the team now are going to estimate whatever has not yet been estimated. If whatever reason there are some user stories that were not yet estimated during the backlog refinement meeting, during the spring planning meeting, you guys can also go ahead now and estimate those story, right? We want to make sure that all of our story are estimated, right? We want to know how long it will take each of our team members, how long it will take them to complete your task. We want to know how long it will take them to complete the work. So they should estimate those user stories during the spring planning meeting if they weren't estimated yet in the backlog refinement. And again, if there's any other user stories that the team wants to work on that are in the backlog that the product owner wants the team to look at, they can still use that sprint planning meeting and review the backlog and see if there's anything else that is not yet in the current spring backlog. They can review whatever else that the product owner feel like these are priority, and then again, it still has to meet definition already, right? Whatever we're committing to, whatever the team is accepting during the spring planning meeting needs to meet definition already. Definition already just means that this story has all the criterias that is needed, everything that's needed for development is on the user story, and the team as a whole accept that we understand the work, we understand the user story, and it's going to take us X amount of time to get this work done. So the user story must meet definition already before you guys are accepting that user story during your spring planning meeting. Another thing that you guys we don't do in the refinement meeting that you do in the spring planning meeting, our capacity, right? So during your spring planning meeting, the scrum master should go over the capacity of the team to know how much time the team can put, how much work they can commit to in that particular spring. So go over the capacity of the team to know who's going to be present during the next 2 weeks. If you guys are doing a 2 week spring plan, it's 2 week sprint, go over the capacity of the team to see how many team members are going to be present during that sprint when they start doing the work. And then also before the planning meeting, make sure that you go over your velocity, right? And that's something that you don't also go over during the refinement. You don't do velocity during the backlog refinement meeting. You do your velocity, you calculate your velocity during the before the spring planning meeting, right? Go on your Jira, check on the reports, check the velocity of your team, see how much work your team can commit to for the sprint that's about to start. It's important to know the velocity so that way you have an idea of how much work they should commit to for the sprint that they're about to start, right? Because we don't want our team members to overcommit, and obviously we don't want them to undercommit as well. So during the planning meeting, make sure that you have your velocity calculated, know how much work, how many story points your team should be accepting during that spring planning meeting. Once you know the velocity of the team, as the team members are accepting the work from the product owner, you're checking the amount of story points that are adding up, right? If it meets, if it kind of like in that range of your velocity, if you know that it's around the range of the velocity, then you can advise or educate your team to stop accepting more work unless they are willing to commit and deliver it, right? But we don't want them to overcommit because we want our team to focus on what they are able to deliver during that particular spring. So those are the main differences between the backlog refinement and the spring planning meeting. If there's anything else that I did not cover, please do not hesitate, as always, to send me an email or leave a comment. I'm going to reply back to you. Again, thank you so much for joining. And my email is nicole.agilepractitioner@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you guys next week.